Hey everybody, this is Zach Ditmars from Fish Talk Magazine. Thanks for tuning in for another edition of Live with Lenny. Tonight we'll be taking a look at the status of the Chesapeake Bay striper fishery as we enjoy the final days of the Maryland season, the final month of the Potomac and Virginia seasons. I'd like to welcome our Angler-in-Chief, Mr. Lenny Rudo.
Hey there, how you doing, Zach?
What's happening?
Good to see you.
You too.
I have to apologize. I'm not wearing my usual Fish Talk garb. I did put on my hat, but I can't wear my shirt because my house is like 64 degrees right now. I needed a sweatshirt.
It got cold out there today.
Well, my HVAC unit blew up this week. Totally dead. But the good news is, whoa, he popped in and then he popped out.
Oh, no, we got hacked.
But the good news is I had to replace 4 tires on my truck. Isn't that awesome?
And now because of that, it's not going to snow once this whole winter. Probably
not. I'm cool with that, though. I don't want snow. I want to go fishing. Speaking of fishing, we got all kinds of cool stuff to talk about tonight. We are nearing the end of the season. We wanted to give a little update. I'm going to tell you all right now, the reports are up, even though today is Thursday. I put them up tonight. I asked Dylan Wooders, our reports editor, to do them a day early today, this week, because I got a trip tomorrow. I'm fishing tomorrow, man. I'm not going to be at the desk in the morning. So we got them up and in, and we're in the process of rapid changes right now. That water's getting really cold. Those fish are shuffling deeper. They're shuffling south. And Zach, you've been in on several of these trips where we've had fish off the green number 1 south of Thomas Point, and then they were off of Franklin Manor, and then they were off of Holland Point. And last time I was out, they were all the way down south of Chesapeake Beach. So that's not to say there are no fish north of there, but the bulk of the fish is definitely in transition. They are moving. And we have a couple guests with us tonight, which is awesome because we're going to be able to talk about just exactly, perhaps why some of what's going on is going on. Should we introduce them, Zach?
Absolutely.
Let's bring them out. We already got a peek. We got a very brief peek for just a moment.
Yeah, I don't know how he had control. Anyway, I'd like to welcome Mike Waine of the American Sportfishing Association. Hey, Mike.
Good to see you, Mike.
Hey, guys. Thanks.
Stay on.
Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm going to try and stay on this time.
So, Mike, why don't you give us just a 20-second quick elevator pitch on who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm the Atlantic Fisheries Policy Director for the American Sportfishing Association, and we represent the recreational fishing industry, our membership, our businesses, tackle stores, tackle manufacturers, manufacturer reps, and recreational fishing is big business. We've 128 billion in economic output and over 52 million anglers nationwide, and a lot of those striper fishermen in the Chesapeake Bay area. So happy to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
And I would just like to point out for the record, for those folks out there who might not know, you guys at ASA aren't just like desk jockeys working in the fishing zone. You're anglers. And I know this for a fact because I fished with a bunch of you guys before, and you guys are in. So I love it. Zach, let's bring out our next guest.
Welcome, David Sikorski from the Coastal Conservation Association of Maryland. What's up, Dave?
How y'all doing? Good to be here.
Yeah, same deal. Why don't you give us the quick elevator pitch on who you are and what you do? 20
Sure.
seconds.
I'm the executive director of CCA Maryland, Maryland's only statewide recreational fishing organization. And so I get the pleasure of working with groups like ASA and many others to make sure that we're ensuring the health of our natural resources, our fishery resources, and just as importantly, anglers' access to them. I'm also honored to be a ongoing proxy for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And so I get to sit at the management board level, and I'm the chair of the Sport Fisheries Advisory Commission, which gets to advise Maryland DNR.
And I would just like to point out for folks, once again, because I know it to be a fact, David is not just a guy working for CCA. He's an angler. I have fished with him, and he almost caught as much as me. Almost.
There's always next time.
Now, guys, we have something set up for you, okay? I got this all prepped out. And I'm going to ask you both and everybody out there to watch this little presentation and see if you can pick up on a theme. Zach, let's let it roll. Oh, that's the wrong order. There we go. Okay, let's start over again. Here we go. This is just a couple weeks ago, 2022. Awesome day of fishing. Look at the fish we caught. A lot of fun. Had a good time. And this is just about a week later. Same deal. We caught, probably, I don't know, 12, 15 fish like this. Had a great day. And this is just another trip right up there off of Franklin Manor. You can see the lovely gal had a great time catching these fish. And this is just the other day. My neighbor and friend Vadim got this picture. I was so thrilled because we got the new boat in there. And you can see we were catching fish and having a good time. Oh, this is a throwback here, 2006. Boy, look at that fish. Here's another throwback. That's my lovely wife, Melissa, with another fall fish from 2009. And here we go. There's me with another one from 2009. Ignore the fact that I used to have black hair. I'm sure you didn't even notice that. But, you can see the fish here that I caught. Now, let's bring on our guests again and see if anybody can guess what I'm driving at here with these pictures. Dave's waving his hand. Come on, Dave. What you got?
The fish are smaller.
The fish are smaller. Not only are the fish smaller, I didn't bother taking fish like we're catching today back then. Like, you held up a 25-incher and went, it's too little for a picture. We're not going to bother with that one. Let's throw it back. We're fishing for 30 to 36-inch fish generally, occasionally 28. I'm going to put the ball in your court. What's going on?
Well, it's a matter of the abundance of year classes in the fishery. This is something that fisheries managers track. It's something that we look at, Mike and I and many others throughout the management process. And, you can't catch fish if they're not born. And then also fish need abundant forage and habitat, which includes not only structure, but also water quality, water temperature, water salinity. All these things affect the fish throughout their lives. And so ultimately, what's happening right now is the Chesapeake Bay does not have the abundance of year classes that we as anglers want, and we used to enjoy kind of during the peak of this fishery.
I think I've seen a grand total of 1, maybe 2 fish over 30 inches this fall. It's pretty darn sad. Mike, you got anything to add to
that? Yeah, it's an interesting time right now for the striper fishery, rockfish, as you guys know it locally. We're in a transition period of trying to rebuild this iconic fishery, and there's been recent management action, but there's still a long way to go. We've got different dynamics with the bay fishery versus the coast fishery, and trying to control mortality across both regions is a continuous struggle. But the managers have been taking action recently to try to do that. And also remember, we just finalized Amendment 7, which is the management changes that really reinforce the conservation ethic of the fishery management plan for striped bass. So hoping we can get into some of that as well. But yeah, I think everyone has observed changes in the striped bass fishery as anglers. And it's really important to reflect on those changes throughout the years, because that information is really useful, not only for you to understand how the fishery is changing with the angling you do, but also to be communicating those types of changes to folks like Dave and the other managers, so that they have a good understanding of the constituents and what they're seeing on the water.
Now, at some point, we definitely got to get back to Amendment 7 and that whole ball of wax. But first, I got 2 more slides to show you guys. There's only 2. Might be kind of hard to pick out what I want to drive at with them. But another thing that we see this year that I've been seeing get progressively worse for probably 5 or 6 years. I can put my finger on it. Zach, can you bring up the next slide, please? Wow, look at those. That's everybody's dream, right? You just dream of seeing the surface being churned and birds like this. And this was back somewhere in the 2006, 2009 zone. Let's go to the next one, Zach. Let's take a look at, oh yeah, this is what we see today. You see a couple birds flying high. They get together for maybe 30, 45 seconds, and they might work real hard for 30, 45 seconds. And then they split up and they fly around again. Again. What's going on?
It's I would say it's the same thing. It's very similar to what we talked about a minute ago. It's a matter of abundance. And so for birds to be able to benefit from predator fish pushing bait to the surface, there needs to be an abundance of predator fish. There needs to be an abundance of bait for the birds to then concentrate on top of. And so ultimately in the Chesapeake Bay, we have less places with less abundance of striped bass, less abundance of menhaden year to year. The data shows it. And other bait species, and therefore you're going to have less success as anglers. And I think on one of your recent live with Lenny's, I was commenting, I called it elevator fish. I'm hearing this from anglers up and down the bay. It's good fishing versus bad fishing. That kind of thing's all anecdotal, but consistently I'm hearing people say the fish don't stay up long. And so also I just heard from yesterday a phenomenon where sometimes you'll get birds that are actually swirling on loons as loons swirl and dive. And so they're, in some cases, it's like a false signal for anglers right now where these birds are going crazy. They might be going crazy on another bird, a loon. So
I can actually confirm that on cormorants.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that this year where you've got 50, 60 cormorants diving on peanut bunker. Not a rockfish in town. I mean, nada. You can cast there all day. You're not going to catch a fish.
Yep.
And there are gulls coming in and working over the cormorants. And that's something I've never seen in my lifetime before, but I've definitely been seeing that. It's really interesting to bring it up. I got to say, from my perspective, what I see, not only with the birds, but also with what I see on the meter, it's a matter of numbers. You use the word abundance, right? Because that's the way the scientifical types like to put it.
Yep.
It's numbers. It's just a sheer lack of numbers. Now, we go out there, we have these great days of fishing. We look at Facebook, we see tons and tons of fish pictures. Oh my God, the fishing must be off the hook. It must be incredible. Well, when you go through a summer in the middle Chesapeake Bay, where there are days when you don't see a darn rockfish, and there are days when you see one or two, and there are good days, but you have a lot of tough days. And then you get to the fall, and you catch 10, 12 fish in a day. That can seem really good. When you look at it compared to 2006, 2009, that time frame, it's really pretty abysmal. And the difference, like I say, for 5 years, I've been watching this getting tougher and tougher and tougher and worse and worse and worse. And to me, it's evident. Like, it's really evident. We're working on smaller and smaller pods of fish. Oh, by the way, there might be 20 boats all racing over there when those birds get together for 30 seconds, trying to get in on those fish. Makes it pretty tough sometimes.
Yep.
Hey, Lenny, I just wanted to add to Dave's comments. One thing we've seen for the menhaden population is a big shift in the range to the northeast. And so, I think some of the things you guys are seeing in the Chesapeake Bay, lower amounts of menhaden, range shift of menhaden into the northeast, is some of an explanation for why the predator-prey interactions aren't as strong as, or the display of those interactions and the ability for anglers to target that is not as strong for you guys in the bay, given that those range shifts. So
let me ask you a question. Range shifts, menhaden north. Have we seen a corresponding drop in the allowable catch of menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay?
No.
Isn't that a fiery question?
And I want to bang on. No, sorry, man, but I'm going to bang on this for a minute. I saw your blog on what the ASMFC did with the menhaden catch. This is coastal we're talking now, not in the bay, for next year. And I appreciate you're trying to look at the bright side, but I got to say, man, it really ticked me off. The allowable catch in the Atlantic went up by how much?
Yeah, it was about 20%, I think.
20%.
And the basis, the justification for that increase was a good stock assessment result from the 2022 menhaden assessment that said menhaden is not experiencing overfishing, and it's not overfished relative to those ecosystem reference points. Because remember, now we are using ecosystem reference points for menhaden to acknowledge the role they play as forage for these recreationally important species that we love, like rockfish. So the one challenge there is the scale, right? So that's a coast-wide analysis of, striped bass demand on menhaden as prey and some other of the predator species, but specific to the Chesapeake Bay and the amount of harvest, the high volume of harvest of menhaden that come out of the bay, and how small that ecosystem is relative to the high amount of harvest that's being taken. That is still an outstanding question of, is it appropriate to be harvesting all those fish within the Chesapeake Bay? And it's something that, we as a coalition have been working to try to get the states and ASMFC interested in diving deeper into that question.
And I know this is a problem both you guys have been working on incessantly. I appreciate that. I thank you for it. But let me give you a really fun little exercise if you want to have fun sometime. If you take the bunker at an average length of 10 inches, right, which I know is low. Average is actually more like 12. But if you take the average length of 10 inches and you divide out, do the math on this, because I'm not a math guy and I did this and it drove me nuts, but this is true. If you lined up the entire allowable length to catch of menhaden, nose to tail, you could circle the earth 4.9 times.
I'm gonna have to make an infographic on that one, Lenny, because that's
the math.
That's an important way of describing it. Here's another little metric when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay. You talked about reducing catch here, and the board did take action to reduce the bay cap a few actions ago. But the bay cap's not based on science. So it's not saying that there's an available abundance of fish and we're taking a certain amount of them based on the ecological benefit for the bay. We don't have reference points for the bay or that analysis, and that's a problem. It's something we've talked about for a long time, and the power to change that really does lie in Annapolis and Richmond. I mean, ultimately in Richmond with the governor, the VMRC, the legislature in Virginia can make changes in Virginia that can take care of this ecological challenge we all know exists. That's why over 10,000 anglers have signed a petition to Governor Youngkin to take action and move this fishery outside of the bay until science can say that what they're doing is sustainable. Unfortunately, the tail wags the dog here, and it's reversal of burden of proof. All of us are stuck, like guys like Mike and I are stuck to fight in these trenches for this battle and be told, oh, science this, science that. Well, guess what? We need to be protective of this resource, especially as the climate continues to change. We see these range shifts happen. And for a state like Virginia to have 75% of the allocation just shows that the coastwide allocation process and the coastwide management process, while important, really doesn't get at the issues that we have here locally. Ultimately, if the range is moving northward the way we're seeing it, and Mike and I actually experienced it in New Jersey at the annual ASMFC meeting. We're going to talk about that here shortly because we experienced it in a way all anglers want to. But ultimately, where the predator fish are, where the prey fish are, we've got to be smarter about allocating our take of them based on that if we're only going to have a coast-wide analysis of catch. And ultimately, I think a lot of folks know that one of the big reasons Virginia has the majority, the super majority of harvest for the coast is because they have the sole reduction fishery, the one that is capped in the bay at 51,000 metric tons. That cap is about 225 million individual menhaden that are being caught, assuming just slightly less than a half-pound average. And think of how many fish that can feed in this.
Who can do quick math? Would you say 51 metric tons?
51,000 metric tons is about
51,000
million
metric tons. Okay, 10 inches of fish, average weight, a half a pound of fish. Someone do some math, please.
I just said about 225 million pounds.
I want to know how many times that circles the earth. That's got to be a time or two. Now, before we go any further.
Wait, Lenny, I just want to add and put it a slightly different way. Remember, striped bass, the recreational fishing community for striped bass has taken considerable sacrifices to reduce the removal levels on striped bass. Most recently with the 18% reduction that was achieved in 2020. And then, by strengthening the conservation ethic of the fishery management plan through Amendment 7. And so as recreational anglers, we are doing everything we can to address recreational fishing mortality on our beloved rockfish. And so we're asking the question, while we're doing everything on the recreational side, can we do more within the Chesapeake Bay to help bolster the probability that we will successfully rebuild the iconic striped bass fishery? And to do that, does it make sense that we are taking so much of striped bass's prey out of that ecosystem? And so what we're saying as anglers is we are doing our part. We are controlling fishing mortality recreationally, and we believe that managers can do more to address menhaden fishing in the bay and the availability of menhaden as prey for striped bass within the bay ecosystem.
And not only are we taking these fish out of the water, there's the rockfish's food. These also happen to be filter feeders. Light bulb, does the bay need more filtering or less? Anyway,
definitely more.
I want to two quick things. Quick things. The first thing is, in a minute, I want you guys to talk a little bit about the new regs that Virginia did just put in place, because they did just change some regulations. I'm afraid that they're kind of meaningless, but that's just me. I want to hear if I'm wrong about that. But before we do that, I just want to point out, I failed to say at the beginning, as always, people, we want your questions, right? We want your comments. Feel free to pop in any questions at any time into the comments section. Zach will field them and get them to us. And we're just going to, while you guys think about the Virginia thing and the changes, we're going to pause real quick and just ask Zach, do we have questions waiting in the wings? We've been kind of rolling here. Have we missed anybody who's asking something important that we need to cover?
Well, and I've been paying attention to the comments here, and I'm seeing what's playing out in the comments are, anecdotal experiences. Oh, I see bait. I see less bait. I see more bait. This is what I see in the fish's stomachs. And these are things that anglers talk about repeatedly. And this is a great example of why the best available science is what we use to manage our fishery, because if we ultimately had to manage just based on anecdotal experience, it makes it more challenging. And when you have a lack of science in the Chesapeake Bay, like we're talking about on this stuff, this is where, the anecdotal experience kind of reigns supreme. And, our government leaders need to recognize that that's not the right way to do things. We have such academic power in this region, between Virginia and Maryland. We should be better analyzing this work. And if you think about the money spent by our government and then what Mike was talking about and the major impact benefit that recreational angling provides, it's worth it. It's worth the investment. This is a public resource that we all should be accessing. And, no company, no individual, no sector should reign supreme over anything without a strong scientific basis for it.
God, yes. But hard stop. I have a question for you, David.
Mm-hmm.
How in the world can you read the comments while we're on this screen? Like, do you have a separate? I don't get it. How do you keep track of that?
Hey, the MD in my signature may not be for a doctor, but I'm pretty sharp.
I need Zach to okay, he's reading all this because I'm trying to keep track of all this. I don't know. It's a little much for me. But unless Zach bounces in on us, let's get to this Virginia thing and these new regulations. I assume one or both of you can tell us exactly what they are and whether or not they really will have any real effect.
Yeah, I can tell you that both of us have been on multiple calls and efforts recently regarding to these proposed regulations, and that's an important piece. So ultimately, Virginia is different than Maryland. Virginia has an appointed citizen-based commission, and then staff appointed leadership, the Virginia Marine Resources Commissioner, and then commissioners on the commission. They ultimately, I believe it's 9 seats, make the decision on regulations that relate to fisheries, where they've been provided that authority. And so remember that the legislature in Virginia recently provided authority to the VMRC to manage menhaden, and ultimately staff, which are the scientific professionals and managers within the VMRC, have worked with the governor's office. They're part of the executive branch and come up with a proposed regulation which will limit a certain area and times that the purse seines can be used for both the bait and reduction fishery in the Chesapeake Bay. That's a half-mile buffer either side of the CBBT, and then a 1-mile buffer from all points of the mainland up and down the eastern shore of Virginia and then the west coast. And there's a map included in the proposal, and I know both our organizations will be sharing more about this in advance of the VMRC meeting on the 6th, because that's ultimately where the rubber hits the road. CCA will have representation at that meeting. speaking in support of this proposal because it is a step in the right direction.
I like it, but quick pause. Pause. Question. I've seen the bunker boats in Virginia plenty of times. I'm not sure I've ever seen them within a mile of shore. Do they even pull the nets that close?
Well, this is in response to some of the net spills. That's the specifics, kind of.
Yeah.
And the VMRC said that. And so, yes, and the map they provide does show the net sets that occur, the new buffer, and then it gives some understanding and analysis of what sets maybe wouldn't occur under this new regulation. And it's a small percentage.
It will actually move them off the shore a little bit then.
A bit. I will say that, personally and organizationally, we've looked at bigger buffers. I mean, obviously our petition that we're working on jointly is saying get out of the bay until science proves differently. But ultimately this is a step in the right direction. A bigger buffer would have protected more area. My biggest concern is
Edward Grace to Hampton would be perfect.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because as I've said, as I've written, and I think a lot of folks know, 1931 was the year that Maryland said, get out. We don't allow this, industrial sized gear in our bay. And, Virginia, especially the eastern side, has that long expanse of a relatively shallow shelf, and there was not protection around Tangier Island, which I think was a mistake. And that should have been put in place. There's a lot of catching that happens up there. And I can't remember the exact height of the nets. So from the corks to the lead, where they wrap the school of fish, what the exact height is that they use. But ultimately, one of the reasons we saw over, I think it was more than 200 more than 200 bull red drum, were caught in one of the interactions this year. That's bycatch we know happens all the time, and it happens because these nets are being set in shallow water or when these predators are under the menhaden. We all know we catch big bull reds in very deep water underneath of menhaden schools, and so that continues to be a challenge that I think Virginia needs to address. I hope they watch real closely on that and make sure that that Omega and any purse seine operator is held accountable for harvesting these big fish that no one's allowed to kill anywhere in the region. And so it's a whole other piece of the puzzle. And so, yeah, there's plenty of shortfalls with this, and we've expressed those in a letter that everybody will see publicly soon. And we're going to continue to roll our sleeves up with our partners at CCA Virginia and ASA and so many other great groups to weigh in. So, yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think I've said a lot, so I'll let Mike weigh in.
Well, and Mike, I'm going to call on you in 10 seconds, but I just want to point out one thing for everybody to think about. A lot of guys fish the middle bay, the salmons to Point Lookout, but on the east side zone mostly for bull reds this year under schools of bunker. Can you imagine how great that fishery would have been if those boats were allowed in Maryland waters?
Yep.
Because that's right what they would have been looking for.
Yep.
That fishery would not have existed. Take all the guides, all the gas, all the boats, all the fishing rods, all the lures, all the economic value of all that, roll it up and throw it right out the window to catch a pile of fish they sell for what, 10 cents a pound?
Pennies on the dollar, or pennies on the pound. Yeah.
Especially when you compare it to the economic impacts of the recreational industry across not only the bay, but the entire coast that benefit from the rockfish fishery. So, the economics are obviously stacked in our favor on this. And we want to be sensitive to jobs, of course, but, it's not like we're advocating specifically with the Chesapeake Bay cap that they can't catch those fish outside of the bay. We're just saying this is an ecosystem that needs more protection. It's a nursery area. We know it is. There's plenty of science to say that. And we don't need right now specifically that this is what the harvest level should be in the Chesapeake Bay to manage the menhaden reduction fleet. Like, we don't need that specifically to take corrective action. And that's what we're saying. Let's do that. Let's put the onus on the industry to prove that they aren't causing harm. And like I said, we've done what we can for on the recreational side of the house. What more can we do to help rebuild here?
Yeah, much of this clearly is in the hands of Virginia. They do have the lion's share of the catch. And like David said, Maryland saw it in the 30s. Now the bunker boat, the whole industry has a whole lot more pull in Virginia. There's no question about it. So
Lenny, I popped the map. If you want to look at the map of the buffers in the bay, Zach can throw it up. But if people can also find the proposal on the VMRC website, and we can include that link. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see and on the screen here, but
tell me what we're looking at. Is the
but yeah,
pink
so
line the
here,
buffer?
yes, exactly. The pink line is that 1 mile buffer. You see, it extends all the way down into Virginia Beach, and on both sides of the Virginia portion of the bay there. So, and then the dot. Yeah, let me talk about. So the green dots are, I believe, the reduction sets, and the red dots are the bait sets. Because remember, there are a few commercial participants that capture menhaden with purseine in the bay for bait purposes. So this shows both purseining from bait and purseining from reduction. And then you can see the different colored dots that are within the red buffer area. Those dots are sets that would have been impacted by this 1 mile buffer if that buffer was in place when those sets were occurring. So I think this proposal also talks about like what % of sets occur within that buffer. But if you zoom out a little and just look at the big picture, you can just see that, we were advocating for larger buffer areas. I mean, obviously, we're suggesting moving the reduction fleet out of the bay would be the best case scenario. We think they could have gone further with buffers. And you can see from this map why we were suggesting that, right? Like another half a mile or another mile buffer to try to address, or limit the potential for net spills. We think those larger buffers would have captured more of these sets that could result in net spills. And remember,
you know what? As far as the net spills go, I hope they happen close to land. I hope those fish wash up on the shore, because that is the only time people see them. When you look at what this map says to me, looking at all these dots, right? What this map says to me is there've been a hell of a lot more fish that have died and floated out away that nobody's ever seen, because it's happening out in the middle of the bay, not up against the shore. God knows where those fish are ending up. Are there redfish in there? Are there cobia in there? Who knows?
Right. Turtles, whales, or dolphins, that kind of stuff. I mean, ultimately, we know these gear impact other fish that they're not targeting. And one of the challenges is that with some of the data, there's a certain percentage of bycatch assumed in a purseine fishery because of different observations over the years. And it's a small percentage, which on the surface, people go, oh, it's a small percentage, big deal. But it's a percentage of weight. And again, 51,000 metric tons in the bay. I can't remember the total, harvest that they're allocated outside the bay, adding outside the bay. But ultimately, it's a lot of bycatch. And these red drum that were reported in this document that again will be shared, they were all big, breeding age, like over 40-pound average, the ones that were recovered. And there were even additional spills, which Ocean Harvesters, which is the company that technically operates the vessels, they didn't even report. They're required to report their spills, but there were a couple with menhaden all over the place that we can assume was Ocean Harvesters or maybe some of the bait operators, but we don't know because they didn't willfully report them. And thankfully, social media and folks carrying around an iPhone and such in their pocket can take pictures and give a better real-time report that strengthens our voice as advocates. And that's the one take-home message for everybody. If these operators are aggressive towards you as a recreational angler, pushing you out of an area, stick in there and take video and take pictures and prove what you see on the water to decision makers, because most elected officials and regulators can't get on the water, aren't anglers like us. And we need every bit of information you all can put together to pass along the facts and the truth, because ultimately we're combating a lot of misinformation most days.
And we should point out, and I can't say that this is true, but there were reports, I don't know if they were real, but there were reports from some people that redfish count was a partial count because there were some people who collected fish, put them in boats, and then ran them out, as opposed to the ones that ended up in a dumpster. I don't know that that's a true report, but those reports were floating around too. And the truth is, who knows? Oh, Mike, I see your lips moving, but you're muted.
I want to sprinkle in a question from the chat because I feel like it
Please.
hits on a really important point.
How do you do that? All I see is Zach.
Go to
you.
Click the comments, the word comments next to private chat.
Oh, I'm looking at the private chat.
Lenny, this is your platform. Come on, my man.
Here's the thing. I can't see it if I don't wear my glasses.
All right.
My daughter told me if I wear the glasses on the video, it makes me look old.
Right. Well, all right. So John asked, who takes the menhaden? So we talked about that. There's a bait fishery and then a real high volume reduction fishery. What do they do with the fish? So the reduction fishery distills it down into like fish feeds and fish oil pills, etc. And then does the state charge for taking them? That's a really good question. So yes, there are commercial fishing permits, but I believe the fees are relatively nominal. Maybe a couple $100 for the entire season. Maybe Dave, you have some more information to share on that. But this question I love the most. If so, are any of those funds put back in the Bay Health? And here's where I want to really highlight something very important, because the commercial sector I am not aware of any program in which those funds go back to the resource. But what a lot of recreational anglers do not know is there is a 10% excise tax on all fishing tackle and boat fuel sales. And that tax is paid by the angler, and it goes into a trust fund. It's called the Sportfish Restoration Fishing and Boating Trust Fund. And that money is distributed back to all of the states for use in fisheries conservation. And this is not like an insignificant amount of money. This is a huge millions of dollars. I think it was like 170 million or something that got distributed back to the states last year. So I really like this question from John because it demonstrates that the recreational anglers, we are stewards of the resource. We put our money where our mouth is, and we are payers into this conservation and management of our resources. And a lot of state agencies rely on those monies that recreational anglers pay to keep the lights on. And so that's why we think it's reasonable to be asking the commercial sector to do more to help conserve the resource. If they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is, they could move their practices to areas that are not so sensitive, and they could honestly bolster the value that the recreational fishing community brings, not only to conservation, but also to coastal communities.
You know, 10% of fishing tackle sales goes to, I mean, I contributed $1 million last year. Come on.
I know, right?
Well, and furthermore, we've this is something called resource rent in a lot of areas where you're taking resources, forestry, oil and gas, that kind of stuff. There's generally this resource rent concept, and fisheries, commercial fisheries, are frankly in the dark ages when it comes to a reinvestment in the resource, a reinvestment into the public trust. And Maryland DNR in the O'Malley administration did a cost recovery analysis, which was very transparent and just frankly a logical process. It said, okay, we're facing budget cuts, we're facing changes in the way the state can fund this agency. And so we want to look at our special fund revenue, which is money collected through license fees. And they ultimately found that it was something like 110% of the expense for managing recreational fisheries was then paid by recreational fishers. So we were whole. We were paying more than our fair share. And that's not even including some of these excise taxes that are supporting things like boat ramps and fishing piers. And, look around for that sport fish restoration logo in places where you fish, and you will see it. And then ultimately on the commercial side in Maryland, I think it was something like 42% of the expense was being paid by license fees, and then 60-some% if you added in federal dollars, which were coming into the state for various things that the federal government had allocated. And so there was a small increase in license fees done then, but we're still upside down when it comes to managing the commercial fishery. And, Maryland DNR officials that I know well, they'll never say it on the record because they can't, but they are burdened with managing all the different things that happen on the commercial side of things. And then in the end, like Mike said, when it comes to striped bass, we're the ones that are meeting our reductions, and commercial fisheries this last time around in Maryland didn't even reduce their quota. So they're not actually saving fish in a time when we all know more and more striped bass need to be saved right now. So it's unfortunate, but it's, again, why we're in the trenches, why we're standing up for recreational angling and the facts behind it. It is ultimately the public that owns this resource, not the government. They manage it. We trust them to manage it. It's ours, and it's the future. It's not, we've got to be taking care of it for next generations to be stewards of this resource, because our industry has set up the process to manage it right. And it's time to continue to ask our government to do a better job.
So since I gave up on not wearing my glasses,
perfect.
And then at your advice, clicked on the comments thing instead of the private chat thing, I see a couple things that we got to address. And the first one I want to address myself, because Jonathan Tibbs, let's see how quick Zach is. Jonathan Tibbs says, I caught one a few weeks ago with a bunker and a small croaker. Haven't found a rockfish with 3 peanut bunker yet. Mostly 2s. Always wondered how many they would eat on average. Now, I wanted to point this one out because I noticed back in late October and stretching into November, I kept some fish, and when I cleaned them, they did not have bunker in them. In fact, a really nice, I say really nice today, like a 25-incher that was caught under these elevator birds, right, where you would expect to find bunker in them, had a white perch in it, nothing else. 2 or 3 other fish had nothing in them. This entire fall, I think I've only pulled, I don't think I've pulled a half a dozen bunker out of rockfish. So, Jonathan, I'm seeing the same thing. I'm just not seeing the bunker in the fish like normal. Now, Zach, I'm going to put you to the test again. MJ Fishnut has a question about the rockfish tournaments that I want to get up on here on the screen, and I want David to address because he's been very involved in a lot of this. He's saying, if the rockfish are in that dire straits, why do we continue to have rockfish tournaments? I understand the end benefit of the tournament, but at what cost to the added pressure of a stressed species? Dave, please.
Sure. So ultimately, fishing regulations are made so that we stay within the required constraints. We're trying to control fishing mortality, and there's no evidence that a tournament on any given day is going to impact a month-long or year-long effort to manage fishing mortality. I look at it as an opportunity to bring people together, to celebrate the sport, to enjoy the competition. And that's from the CCA perspective. And we haven't had a catch and keep fishing tournament in my time at CCA as an employee, which is almost 6 years now. And well before that. In fact, we've been pushing and leading other groups to do catch and release tournaments only when we know prevailing conditions will mean that the fish live when they're released. We don't have tournaments when the weather's hot, when there's low oxygen in the water. We only focus on the cooler times of year. In fact, we have one on the last day of rockfish season out of Tall Timbers Marina called the Winter Classic. We also never provide a cash prize. And I think that's that's something we choose as a nonprofit. And ultimately it really just shows we want to celebrate the camaraderie and fun of fishing. So that's our perspective and our approach to fishing tournaments. I know it's a low hanging fruit for people to criticize, but given what we provide to the system as recreational anglers, I don't think we should feel guilty in participating. And really, I think if we added up the numbers, it's a small percentage of what's happening on a given Saturday or a given day. And last piece is DNR does regulate striped bass tournaments. They don't constrain them at this point. They've talked about it a lot. We've talked about it through the advisory process a lot. But ultimately, they're a great way to bring people together and celebrate this fishery. And DNR does require that we report length or weight data if it is a keep tournament. But for CCA, we download angler logs, and that's actually providing important length frequency data to managers that they can then use to assess the stock. Because then our anecdotal experience, like you showed really well, Lenny, in those pictures, is actually in real data that's been provided. It's not just pictures. We can see the trends over time. And so I think that's enough to say that, tournaments aren't for everybody, but they are driving data and
I really wanted you to address this because, and I got to say, just for the record, I can't stand tournaments. They drive me nuts.
Me
They
too.
really do. It's like, oh, man, I want to go fishing. I don't have to worry about all this stuff. But I wanted you to address this because we started Fish Talk 5.5 years ago. And at that time, there were probably 10, 12 kill tournaments on the Chesapeake Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Today, maybe there's one or two. And I know that you personally have been involved in taking a couple of those tournaments that had weigh-ins and turning them into catch photo release tournaments.
Yep.
So however you want to look at tournaments, the bottom line is in the last 5 years, I've seen phenomenal progress in taking it from a kill fest to a fun day where you take a picture of the fish and then let it go.
Absolutely. And that's, again, it's the ethic of our community trying to lead. Tournaments aren't for everyone. And in the end, fishing will always have a certain component of killing fish. And that's just the nature of it. And that's okay. It's just understanding what we're doing and being responsible. And we continue to do that, time and time again. And I see another comment from Patrick Glenn. We don't have a weight component in our catch photo release tournaments, so we don't have to worry with that issue. In fact, we did hold a blue catfish tournament with partners in Federalsburg this year, and that comment came up because we were weighing those blue catfish because they were dead. But tournaments are a funny thing. Competition brings out some great things in people and some terrible things. And I get the job of judging a lot of our tournaments and running them. And I love nothing more than trying to catch people that are cheating. We've done it a couple times over the years.
Can we now I want to jump to one more Jonathan Tibbs comment. And I have no idea if I'm even scrolling right. I'm probably missing a whole lot of people. And I'll ask Zach to push in some questions if we got some good ones that are being ignored. But I see Jonathan's about commercial fisheries allowed to drag nets. I'm sure one of you guys can address this. Zach, can we pop this one up? Are commercial fisheries allowed to drag nets for rockfish in Maryland? A buddy of mine saw a boat appearing to drag a net south of the West River about a month ago in a spot we were crushing rockfish. Then the fish disappeared. Not sure if it was a net boat targeting rockfish, but it was coincidental that the rockfish disappeared. Now, I know the answer, but I want to hear it from one of you guys.
Well, today is the day that gill net season opened for rockfish in Maryland.
But that's not a net that's dragged.
Correct. In Maryland, those nets are drifted. They're not dragged by the vessel. They're set out in a line across the current and drift with the current to hopefully, on behalf of watermen.
Is there any net that they're allowed to drag?
No, there's not a drag net. There are spool nets that which are come off a boat. They're a type of gill net, not supposed to be targeting rockfish, but will catch rockfish if there are some in the area. Trawls, which are pulling. Think of it like an upside down cone. Cone of net being pulled through the water, so the big part captures fish and they get concentrated. That's a trawl net. Those are not allowed in Chesapeake Bay waters. And then, like I said, purse seines are not either. That's the ones that wrap the school.
And I do want to point out that earlier this year, I was receiving emails from multiple people who were very stressed out that a commercial boat was pulling a trawl net. It started in the Chester, went through Eastern Bay. I wonder if this was the same boat. It was actually a hydrographic survey. Mm-hmm. It was a weird looking boat, had like a purple stripe. I forget what it's called. Are you familiar with this?
Yep. It looked like a military boat.
Yeah, it was a strange looking boat, but it was not a commercial fishing boat. In the state of Maryland, there is no net that anybody's allowed to pull around and sweep up the fish with. Mm-hmm. So that's nope, not going to let them get away with that, which is a good thing.
Yep. Yeah, and the only kind of net where we can do that is only in shallow water. It's called a hull seine. They have a series of other issues. It's like a man-powered purse seine almost. There's a pole on each side and corks and lead, and they cause all sorts of other impacts. We've debated it in the past, but that is another activity folks will see in the shallow waters. If you see watermen out there kind of scooping them up. Last year there was some conflict with a video on Instagram where big spawning rockfish in Breton Bay were being penned up in these nets and not released immediately. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. And hot tip, Breton Bay seems to be a good place for some staging spawning fish in the month of February. So sorry to the kayak anglers that made that video, but there's lots of spots like that in the Chesapeake where we can really carefully and ethically enjoy these fish and release them back to do their thing certain times a year. So, and I did see a question earlier about Raritan Bay, and it kind of goes back to what Mike and I experienced at the ASMFC meeting. and actually speaks to what we're seeing, the shifting of bait, the shifting of biomass of fish. And I think we can all remember the absolute melee that was Virginia Beach for so long when this fishery was at its peak, and the amazing fishing that was happening there, really offshore though, where folks were breaking the law and going out into the EEZ. Well, the Jersey Shore and Raritan Bay, Sandy Hook, and South is seeing blitzes and amazing fishing like you've never seen before. So while the Chesapeake may not be doing great in the fall, and that's a continued kind of thing, hop in the car and head up to Jersey, and you'd be amazed. There's bait right on the shore. I got to witness humpback whales in the surf line weeks back. I mean, literally right on the backside of shoals of menhaden, bellies on the sand, and then
wait, humpback whales are eating menhaden? Quick, kill all the humpback whales. We can't have that.
Yeah, the good John Page Williams, the retired CBF naturalist, said, menhaden are an amazing fish. They turn sunlight into whale food. So they graze on algae, which is fueled by the sun. They filter the water, and they literally turn it into whale food, and of course, food for so much else.
Nice.
So Mike, what do you think about those beach blitzes?
Oh man, yeah, it was just an incredible display of I think what Chesapeake anglers used to see, and that fishery up there off Sandy Hook. The bunker schools are right in tight to the beach, and the big stripers are blasting them. And so you ask the question, why is this year so much better for that fishery than it has been? Is it related to the new regulations that were put in place with the slot limit and creating a maximum size limit for striped bass, which was the first time to do that for striped bass? Obviously, we know that's a successful management approach for our beloved red drum as well. But we tried it for striped bass and starting in 2020. And, I'm not usually regulations don't have that quick of an impact, but I do think that is contributing to the availability of larger fish. You can no longer take those fish. All of those fish are now released. So you turned all that harvest into live releases, which only a fraction of those end up dying. And so I think there are more big fish around because of that. And I do think that when these blitzes occur along the beach there and you have just such an abundance of prey, those stripers are good at finding them. And Dave and I were stumbling around the beaches there trying to connect on fish and chase the menhaden schools around. It was really fun fishing from the shore.
Yeah, we should point out that run comes and goes. Sometimes they get a week of action. Sometimes they get 2 weeks of action. Some years they don't get any, but usually they get something. And some years they get incredible action. And a lot depends on which way those menhaden go. Because sometimes they just don't hit the beach. It could happen in Ocean City next year. Mm-hmm. It doesn't usually happen in Ocean City, but it could. I remember when I was much younger, the Carolinas was where that happened on a regular basis, often mixed in with gigantor bluefish. And those poor little bunker would literally be jumping out of the water because they were getting eaten. They literally, the beach would be lined with bunker. They just jump out of the water.
That's exactly. I mean, we saw that. Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah. And so awesome. I mean, they were like at our feet. It was incredible to watch. And it was fun fishing, obviously. But yeah, just to see that dynamic, it really drives home. I mean, we all know this because we've seen it. But when you're in that moment, you're like, man, this is why making sure that we're doing what we can to conserve menhaden as forage is so important. Like Dave said, the humpbacks are there. The birds are there, the stripers are there. Like everything is focused on consuming that perfect peanut bunker energy fix. And yeah,
I'm angry at humpbacks now. You made me angry at humpback whales.
No, be angry at right whales.
So
don't even go there.
That,
Lenny. Cut that out of the
cut that
before you post this thing. Cut that out.
Sorry, we're live, Mike.
Hey, Zach.
I know we're live, but there's going to be a recording posted, I assume.
Hold on. I want Zach to bring a question in. From James Flynn on YouTube.
Let's see James' question. Come on with it.
All right. So this is an important part of the management plan and something that was just reviewed with the stock assessment, and is something constantly on my mind. Is it, are the fish just moving, or are there more of them? Are there less of them? That kind of stuff. And it really, it's why I'm very fortunate to absorb so much information from anglers up and down the coast throughout the year. And the answer is, we don't know specifically, but lots of studies can point us in the right direction. And ultimately, a Chesapeake fish is a fish that's going to come back here and spawn, live its first 4 to 8 years in the Chesapeake Bay, and the males are going to hang around a lot longer than the females, and migrate periodically. All fish are going to find habitat and food that's available to them for them to survive. There's been some evidence that the Delaware Bay and Chesapeake Bay genetics have somewhat merged, partly because the canal changes in various things, and so you can find distinct genetics that are like Chesapeake Bay fish. There's also the Hudson River stock, which I believe most of the Raritan Bay fish are, since Raritan Bay is right at the mouth of the Hudson. They're kind of concentrated there, and a lot of studies in the past have shown that Chesapeake Bay large fish, spawning fish, will kind of beeline to the Cape, to Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and then up and around the Cape up into Maine. And that's why I think a lot of the Northeast, like the Maine anglers and such, are, when our reproduction fails like it is right now, the far Northeast folks are going to see it the most. And then that middle section, like the Hudson Bight, they call it, is going to have a higher abundance of fish because the Hudson does produce a lot of fish. That said, the technical folks and the managers at ASMFC said it clear as day in the last presentation they gave, that the Chesapeake and Maryland's young of year, Maryland's success or failure is still the major driver of overall striped bass abundance up and down the coast. And so that's very disconcerting for what's happening right now with abundance in Maryland, 4 extremely poor years in a row. And so while the anglers in Jersey, folks up and down up through southern New England, have really enjoyed some great abundance, and like Mike said, they're conserving the big fish like never before, and maybe have found some sort of sweet spot there, with regulations. We still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're protecting the small year classes coming through the Chesapeake, because the coast will get them. And a lot of folks like to blame one state versus another. There's a lot of talk about Maryland and New Jersey doing this, that, and the other. A lot of that's fueled by misinformation. The reality is states benefit, anglers benefit when there's an abundance of fish in their laps, and we all want to go catch them, but we should be responsible to it. And that's why, again, science must rule the day, and making sure that we create these regulations. And one last piece, when it comes to affecting regulations, states are in charge of their regulations, period. The governor, the executive branch, and the ASMFC is put there as a guardrail or a ceiling, so we don't go any higher or go beyond what's agreed upon from a coast-wide perspective. And I just turned in a thorough rec data and fishing license report to our leadership in Maryland. Lenny was one of the ones that sat in on this task force. It was created by legislation this spring, and a part of that spoke to the need to better analyze the Chesapeake Bay fish, to better answer this question. There's also a program that you'll be hearing more about later, called Tag Chesapeake, that CCA has funded or founded with our partners like Under Armour, Tide Outfitters, and Lenny himself happens to be, this is drum roll, this is like breaking news, Lenny is the first tagger which has had one of his tags returned. And he tagged a fish right off of Franklin Manor. And just earlier this week, a gentleman caught it at Smith Point Light at the mouth of the Potomac. And this was a 20-inch juvenile striped bass. The gentleman returned the fish into the water with both tags intact, so one of you might catch it. But there's hundreds of striped bass out there with tags on it that CCA and Under Armour and Tide Outfitters have put together this program to better answer these questions. And it's called Tag Chesapeake because you'll see coming in 2023 a much broader Chesapeake perspective from CCA and our partners. And realizing that we're all in this together, it shouldn't be one state versus the other. We need to answer these questions with science so we can guarantee this future access and hope that these blitzes will be something that our grandchildren will experience.
So I'm super excited about that tag return. And for a couple reasons. The first is the fish grew a half an inch in a month.
Yep.
And it went from my backyard all the way down to Virginia. So that's pretty cool. But what's even cooler is the angler pulled the fish out, recorded the numbers, took a picture of it, put it right back in. So we're going to get like double dose data out of this fish. That's super cool. I got a question. and I think I'm afraid we're already running overtime, and I should. We're right on time.
What else?
I should allow for other people's questions, but I got to ask this question. This is killing me after what we've been talking about. I'm not sure, Mike, David, I'm not sure which one of you guys is the best one to direct this to. So whoever knows, jump in. My entire life, I've been taught 50 to 70% of the entire East Coast stock of rockfish spawns and is born in the Chesapeake Bay. It's been a standard my entire life. You always hear that. Some say 50, some say 70. I've heard on the periphery 80, but really it's 50 to 70 is a range I constantly hear. How old is that number? And when's the last time anybody checked to discover, hey, actually now it's like 40 to 60? I don't know, right? Because the Hudson stock has been advancing while our stock has been lagging. Do we know? How old are those numbers?
I think I'm going to jump in, Dave, because I didn't see it. I do not know off the top of my head the answer to that question, Lenny, but it's something that we could get and follow up with folks on. I've heard the same ranges you talk about. I don't know if there's anybody actively, and if people know, feel free to put it in the chat. I don't know if anybody is actively studying the genetic makeup of the migratory stock today.
Well, this is why it worries me, because
I think it's
old as the
no, but
hill, and I've been hearing it my whole life.
I know you make such a valid point, right? Because what we're seeing, of course, is a movement of the striped bass migratory stock to the north, right? The North Carolina anglers, which I am one of them, wish that those fish came down to the Outer Banks and graced us with their presence. A lot of recreational anglers remember how good that was in the mid 2000s, and maybe there's an opportunity for those fish to come back to the south. But with warming waters, I think we've all seen that this year. Like, it's just we have a big albie fishery down here in the fall, and I'm based out of North Carolina, and we haven't even seen those albies yet. I think those fish are still to the north. So and we would typically be like in the peak albie season right now for us. And we just haven't really seen a lot of those fish. So we know that this is changing in real time, right? And so it would be important to get a better understanding of how is climate shifts impacting the genetic makeup of the migratory striped bass population. Well, and are the Hudson River and spawning stocks to the north of the Chesapeake going to become more important spawning contributors to that migratory stock? And that's an unanswered question, and I think it deserves attention. And I think it would relate obviously directly back to your original question, but right now it's just a hypothesis without data to support it.
And it's also only a little piece of what's going on. This dovetails beautifully into our next set of slides. But Zach, before you put them up, I'm going to ask you for a special favor. Please scan the questions, scan the comments. If you see anything really critical, get it lined up and ready for right after these slides, okay? But go ahead and pop up these slides. I hear noise. I hear crazy noise. Oh, God, what broke?
It's the slide noise.
Let's see these slides, because these are...
Hold on, wait a second. David is asking for a fish stat. What were you talking about?
I was just asking to pull in that one question from YouTube. Well, we can do that after the slides.
Well, so wait, did you cruise?
No,
Zach?
no.
What? Okay.
We're here the whole time.
Okay.
Well, there's a question that asks about something I think it's important, and I'll give a short answer as I can.
Do it.
Related. It's asking what are our organizations proposing about low dissolved oxygen, excess nitrogen and phosphorus levels, loss of SAV, habitat loss, etc. And I can tell you that if you look over that shoulder, that's a representation of one thing we're doing with the habitat component in CCA, and that's building artificial reefs that are covered in oysters, which do help with that. With those challenges you've mentioned, clarifying the water, removing excess nutrients, which allow grasses to grow. And ultimately that swirl coming off of it is an artist's rendering of the fish that habitat can produce, or not if it fails. And I just want to point folks to the past, present, and future of striped bass that Lenny has hosted with us throughout this year, because we did talk greatly about habitat and forage and some of these external drivers that rec angling is really not so much connected to is, a driver per se. These are things that climate, that our overall populations, that failure to meet runoff standards and failure to control sewage plants and stuff coming over dams and through dams. I mean, all these things have a major impact. And frankly, we all need to work together to hold our elected officials accountable for implementing positive actions in this watershed. And I think, unfortunately, the Chesapeake Bay is falling short of some of our program goals that were originally set for 2025. And that's a chance for new leadership in Maryland, coming up in January. And it won't be long till there's new leadership in Virginia again, to really dig in and work on these issues. So, we're typically in the nitty gritty of the technical side of fisheries. But of course, CCA does have this robust habitat program, and we work with a lot of great partners that are pushing for these actions or water quality essentially to be taken care of as well.
Yeah, the state of the habitat is really a big deal.
Paramount. Yeah. Lenny, I just want to add that we know that successful spawning for striped bass is environmentally driven. We know that. And we know that there have been poor year classes spawned in the Maryland portion of the bay in the most recent several years. I think this year was the fourth poor year class in a row. And so I just wanted to say that, again, when we've collectively as a recreational fishing community put our support behind Amendment 7, that amendment contained a deeper look into, are we using the correct assumptions when we go to project what the fishery will look like moving forward? And remember, fishery managers, they manage the people, right? That benefit from the public resource. And so the question we were asking is, are we making the correct predictions? And do we need to do more to account for those low levels of recruitment when we try to project what the fishery will look like in the future? And what kind of management impact does that have? And so ultimately, when Amendment 7 got finalized, there was a provision in there that said, okay, if we have low recruitment, we should be assuming that low recruitment will continue, and we need to be adjusting our management to account for that. And that's really important, right? Because it says a couple things. One, if the managers and the anglers cannot create the perfect environmental conditions for a good spawning year class, but we can do our part to try to account for that and make sure that the impact that we're having on the resource is factoring in these poor year classes. And that's exactly what amendment says that the managers should be doing.
And we can try and turn our attention to the environmental conditions.
Yes. And that is the biggest shortfall of fisheries management in the US and probably globally, is there's the environment, the habitat plays such a critical role. And I'm sure Dave.
Fortunately, in the Bay, we still have a whole 1% of the oysters left to filter the water. So thank God for that, right?
Yeah, as fishery managers, and Dave, I think you can appreciate this, the policy agenda is really full in fishery management actions, and it doesn't leave a ton of time to focus on some of these other really important aspects of fisheries management.
No, but I love the direction that oyster replenishment has taken in the state of Maryland, where now we're attaching it to big giant chunks of concrete. So good luck getting them, guys.
Well,
I love that.
And
I love that. We need more big giant chunks of concrete with oysters stuck on them and inside of them.
Right.
perfect.
And it's important to say that, like all things in statistics, you can mess around with the numerator and denominator and come up with different percentages and such. I mean, we've seen all that with the recent pandemic and all the graphs and charts that everyone's seen on TV endlessly. And is it 1%? Who knows? Is it a percentage, talking about striped bass in the bay, what percent do they provide to the coast? I mean, who knows? There's a lot of important data we can look at. Recently, the oyster population has rebounded slightly, but it's actually projected to go back down. So it's yet again another thing where we have to manage based on the ecosystem need, not just the economic need, which is a terrible shortfall in Maryland for a century plus. I'm on the Oyster Advisory Commission too, and I think we've made some progress recently in our scientific understanding and ability to model what's happening. So kudos to the great team at University of Maryland, and Mike Wilberg was a lead on that. We're building the academic strength, and it's time to build the political will to take action and do the right thing by the resource because of so much that benefits from it. And things don't need to be rec versus commercial. I think that's the kind of the weakest spot we land in quite often. And I'd encourage folks to engage and realize that joining organizations like ours, it's to speak for exactly what our mission says. And it's ensuring the health and conservation of our marine resources and anglers' access to them. It doesn't mean I want to take away anything from anyone else. It means I want to empower all of us to make the right decisions, because we all know that elected leaders have a lot on their plate. Unless we get in there and work effectively with them to try and find solutions, we're just going to be complaining. We're going to be blaming our neighbors, and we need to step up, roll up our sleeves, and get real work done, not just a bunch of blaming.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Mm-hmm. We're overtime already. Zach popped in and then he popped out again. And I'm still not sure if he had ID'd a particular question or two that he was dying for us to get to. So, Zach, are you sitting there going, they never got to this?
Not exactly. There's a ton of chatter going on. I kind of was relying on you guys to pinpoint anything out.
With my newfound technological abilities,
we got a lot of people watching. If you guys are cool.
Good. All right.
So somewhere.
If that's the case, do me a favor. Do me a favor. We should, everybody, if you want to go eat dinner, don't feel bad about clicking out. Okay. But we didn't get to our final little tidbit here. So do me a favor, Zach, real quick, bring up these last 3 slides, give them like 3 to 5 seconds each. And let's just take the conversation to what they mean very briefly, 5 minutes. Okay. But we're just going to give each of these slides like 3 to 5 seconds. Oh, look at that. All over the Patuxent. All over it. All clear up to the Severn recently. We love this guy. But we're seeing an awful lot of them lately.
Smith Island.
Yes. Ooh. And of course, we love this guy. But we're seeing changes afoot, right? It really is. Now, for my money, all the specs and cobia that want to come within range of my boat, bring them on. I'm absolutely thrilled.
Send them north, Mike. Send them north.
The cutlass
we'll try.
The cutlass fish is a really interesting newcomer. Like, that's pretty bizarre. It's cool. It's fun to catch. It's good to eat. It's really wacky. This picture was taken in the Patuxent River. But, I didn't want to dwell on specific species. What I wanted to just point out here is that as the rockfish fishery is changing, so is everything else.
And that's kind of my point, right? Is like there's so many moving pieces here. And we're not going to have answers for every question that we ask, right? And so we have to be able to take action with there being some conservative action, with there being some uncertainties associated with that. And that's just how it has to be. We'll never catch up to that and have everything we need to make the most sound, perfect decision. And so
the good news from my fish head perspective, right, is yes, it's getting harder to catch rockfish. Yes, there are fewer. Yes, they're smaller. But there are other options out there that are expanding at the same time. And guess how many times I went fishing for rockfish in, say, July and August this year?
0.
0. Not only weren't there many around in the Middle Bay, it's also when you're most likely to kill them.
Yeah,
Right, by
the water's
accident.
so hot.
Right, the water's so hot, by accident you're catching and releasing, not good. But we had Spanish mackerel, we had bluefish close to home. Like they came pretty far up the Middle Bay. A slight run down, you're in cobia range. You can get into speck range. So it doesn't have to be all rockfish all the time.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great opportunities. And I spoke at the Rec Summit, the NOAA Recreational Fisheries Summit earlier this year. And the whole theme was fisheries in a time of change. And, what I said was, look, we all, as this massive collective community, we all want different things, but ultimately we're going to go fishing for something. And we're extremely fortunate to have these diverse fisheries in the Chesapeake Bay region, lots to go after. And as long as folks are informed and educated about their impact and why they're seeing, these things, we're going to make the right decisions as a community, because that's the ethic of the recreational community. And to me, bring me a sheep's head all day long. They're a beautiful fish.
Awesome. Although, could do me a favor, Mike, could you bring me some snook?
They're not quite to you yet, are they, Mike?
If they are, I haven't seen them, but I guess I wouldn't be
really
totally
tasty.
Shocked.
They're really, really tasty. So I wouldn't mind some snook. But permit would be cool. Could you send some permit up here? That'd be all right, right? We've already got tarpon. A lot of people don't even realize it, but they are there.
Yep.
If you want to suffer through the bugs and the misery, they're there. So very interesting. Guys, thank you so much. We're way the heck over time. Does anyone have any last comments they have got to throw in before we go?
I do. I have a few.
Oh, Zach, get to it, man.
I really appreciate everyone hanging out with us tonight. I just want to, Dave works really hard on as executive director for CCA. So we got to just tell people about the Pickerel Championship that's going on through February 28th. Multiple species, multiple ways to win, youth, fly, kayak. It's awesome. We participate every year. It's a great winter motivator, gets you out of the house, provides some vital data about a kind of an overlooked fishery. So I think we all agree about that.
There's also a great Calcutta that our great friends at Anglers are sponsoring this year. Don't forget to add on to that. And if there's any lady anglers out there listening, or any guys that have lady anglers in your world, December 11th, there's a great ladies happy hour at Anglers to talk about things that women have in common in the angling world, and a lot more to come. And we're setting up some great seminars that I know at least Lenny and Zach will be able to attend. Mike, you can come up to North Carolina if you want on some of these things throughout the year. And we're going to have a great party at Boatyard Bar and Grill for the prizes this year for the Pickerel Championships.
And you can win, people, these super cool copper pickerel. That's like really cool. And I got the mini one because I got third place.
I showed him where it fit.
I'm still excited about the mini one. I am.
More importantly, this week, December 10th, the Winter Classic. So, we're talking about striped bass. So, like David said, catch and release tournament helps collect data, vital data. So hop on over to CCA if you're interested. It's Tall Timbers.
Register by the 3rd and you get a free Under Armour shirt. After that, you're paying for it.
Sounds like a good deal. I also want to ask Mike, so who can join ASA?
So we are a membership of businesses. So if you're a tackle retailer or a tackle manufacturer rep, that makes up the core of our members. If you're a media, if you're in fisheries media, like our good friend Lenny and Zach here, you guys can also be members as well. But we are not a individual member-based organization. But we obviously advocate on behalf of recreational anglers, and what's good for the industry is good for anglers. So, and vice versa. So it's a really exciting role for me to be in, because it's, Dave in the CCA mission has more of an individual-based membership, and ASA has the industry business-based membership. So working together as a community in these policy discussions really provides us the opportunity to be covering all the diverse aspects of what makes recreational fishing so incredibly huge. And whether you're in the Chesapeake Bay or in the Raritan Bay chasing striped bass, you see it
Huge and
all year
and
long.
awesome.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why we do this, right?
Hey, you bet. Woo! Man, we're way over time, Zach.
That's what happens when you let me talk too
I
much.
don't know. We had a time limit. There's no
I
limit.
think, well,
That's what I was saying. Is
Wine
I was
glasses
like,
empty. His wine
we're
glasses
supposed to be an hour.
yeah, my wife asked me, she's like, how long is this thing going to go? I was like, whenever we're done, I'm not sure.
Well, appreciate everyone for hanging out. Awesome discussion. You know, in Maryland, the season closes soon, and Virginia, you know, in a few weeks. But our Prop Talk editor, Kaylee Jasinski, I gave her a shout out, meticulously maintains our calendar. Tons of events coming up in January and February, winter fishing shows and all that. So all that's updated at fishtalkmag.com/calendar. And thank you, Lenny, as always. Awesome presentation. Mike and David, thanks for joining us.
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Zach, for all your work.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.